Well, hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar. So tonight we are going to be talking about longevity hacks, choices, things that you can do to age the way you want to. Hopefully that's gracefully. I know it's my choice to age gracefully, but it's giving you the choice. How do you want to age? And really, when we think about getting old and aging, a lot of people think, oh gosh, they think of these older people hunched over, you can't move very much, losing your minds, and unfortunately stigmatized to what aging is. And to me, I don't see that anymore. I see infinite possibilities. We don't have to get slower. We don't have to get sicker. We don't have to shrink. It's really funny because my great aunt, she always seemed to get shorter every year. I have to tell this story before I bring on my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Betty, who is going to be hosting with us tonight. But my Aunt Jen, so she was my great aunt, every year, like I said, she started shrinking. Little spitfire though, always just amazing. But what my mom used to do is give her some helium balloons so she wouldn't lose her when they went shopping. And they used to laugh about it. She had such a great attitude. And when she finally passed away, my mom gave the eulogy and she had helium balloons at the funeral and told that story, and people were just laughing. And, there again, we can now choose how we want to age, keeping our humor, keeping our strength. It's not inevitable that we have to lose our vitality. So, as I said, I am wonderfully here with Dr. Betty Murray, and we are going to be talking about longevity. How does that look? What can we do? How can we make those choices? Putting the agency back in your hands in aging. So, Dr. Betty, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We are going to have some fun tonight.
Yeah. It's funny. I was trying to explain to somebody last weekend about, the active aging. And I was like, look, we don't, not that I didn't love her, but we don't relate to Betty White aging. We relate to J-Lo aging. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
The idea that you just sort of slowly age and crumble and expect things to fail. I'm like, no, we don't have to do that. That's not a guarantee. And so this is a good conversation to have today.
Absolutely. And some of the things that we're going to be diving into, we have mentioned before, but we're going to put it in the frame of longevity and talking about, what is longevity in itself? The fact that, when we're talking about myth busting, okay, what we just said, aging does not equal that inevitable decline of all faculties that we have, physical, mental, emotional, etc. Really, we all need to start reframing our idea in saying, you know what? First of all, understanding that aging, we find is more influenced by the choices we make, good, bad, otherwise, and also the genes that we have. The hand that we have been dealt, the blueprint of our genes to say, okay, this is what I have to work with. All right, I've got strengths here, got weaknesses here, and the choices that I make are going to put pressure on our weaker genes, and that can show up in different ways. But the choices we make can also strengthen those weaknesses and strengthen even more the strong parts of our genes. And we're going to be talking about what some of those genes are. So really, I want a major takeaway for all of you today to reframe what you see as longevity and aging, that it's really not about getting older or living to 180 or whatever else. It's not just that. Really what it's about, it's that health span. It's the quality of your life during the years you have left, that you want to have that vitality. You want to have the energy. You want to have the spunkiness. You want to have your humor. You want to have the sharpness of mind. You want to have that libido. You want to be able to get up and down stairs and stand up from your chair, or be able to get on the floor with your grandchildren and stand back up right away, not taking 5 minutes to do so. So, Betty,
Yeah.
what does longevity and health span look like to you?
Yeah, it's because a lot of times we hear the word lifespan and lifespan, I'm going to throw some stats out. So like a woman on average in the United States today outlives a man by 4.5 years. So our lifespan is longer, but our health span is poorer. So what it means is, yes, we are on the planet longer, but we're more likely to be in chronic disease or chronically unwell using today's current stats. So health span is about having the highest quality life you have until the very, very bitter end. And I think if anybody listens to Dr. Peter Attia, he calls it, the centenarian decathlon. It's things like lifting up a toddler, being able to go up multiple flights of stairs, being able to step up on a curb without tripping. It's when we look at the active aging, some of it is if we don't take actions like what we're going to talk about today, yes, cells are going to age, tissues are going to age, but it's keeping mental faculty strong, right? We want to have a strong working memory, strong working brain, be able to do cognitive tasks. I want to maintain physicality, which means independence. Like, to me, that's really important. Losing independence is one of the hardest things for anybody. If you've ever cared for an ailing parent or somebody like that, is when they lose their independence. And then I think it's also the quality, right? I know at 55, I sit and think about all the time, like, I love what I do and I spend an inordinate amount of time doing it. But there's also, this is the time of really stepping into the go-go years. It's like making sure you go and have a really rich life. So longevity and health span also means richness in your experience, whatever it is that you define as rich. Like, I think those are all the things that play into health and well-being. And, not having chronic disease and being able to move and sleep and all those things play into it. But it really is more about that experience at this point, and what is it going to look like?
Yeah. And, I think that a main driver of, like, well, why do you want to do this? It's like, okay, I want to do these things, okay, that we're going to be talking about, and start implementing those things in my life. But it's the why. Why do you want to do those things? What is the driving force? What is going to make you get your ass out of bed and work out in the morning when you don't feel like it? When you're like, oh God, I just don't want to get up. I want to stay in bed and sleep another hour. There's going to be something that makes you do these things, that makes you want to do these things, even when you don't want to. Or when no one is looking.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So I think knowing and feeling intrinsically your why do you want to live longer, or why do you want to have a really good health span? And I'm going to share one of mine, one of my biggest ones. And I know I've mentioned this before in webinars and podcasts. It is my family, especially my grandchildren. I just had the greatest honor of helping deliver my third grandchild, my little grandson, the first child of my daughter, my oldest. And that was so flippin' amazing that I got to catch him coming out, lay him on her chest, be there the whole time supporting her, you know, and her husband, and being there as part of her birthing team was absolutely incredible. And you and I are the same age. Okay, so obviously I was a bit younger when I had my kids, which I love because I get to share and experience things with them, you know, as adults now, and then their children. So I now have 3 grandchildren under 2.5 years old.
Yeah.
So the oldest one is not quite 2.5, but I'll tell you what, they're like, you know, she's like, Nana, constantly wants me to pick her up. So yeah, what am I doing? Picking up something heavy constantly on the hip, you know, and I've got her little brother who's 7 months old on my other hip. I'm going up and down the stairs. I'm, you know, getting on the floor, and I am playing toys with them. And then, you know, she starts running off or starts going after something she shouldn't be, you know, whether it's a glass of water that was left, you know, in her hand's reach, that I'm like, okay, I need to be able to get up off the floor, very quickly run over there and stop her. You know, so it's just the natural living, being able to do that without having to think, oh my gosh, I can't get up. I can't move very well. I have to be able, I don't want to have to think about it. I want to
Yeah.
have the strength to continue to pick them up and to play with them and to play sports with them and to go hiking with them and to do all of the things.
Yeah.
That is my why. That is what drives me every day. Now, am I perfect? No. You know, are there days that I'm like, yeah, I'm just not getting up right now? Yeah. But
No,
for the
yeah.
most part, that 80-20 rule, okay, they're my reason.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what is your reason? Would you like to share?
Yeah. You know, what came to me while you were saying that, it's like, are you going to be a participant or an observer?
Mm.
Right. Because I can tell you, I've had little kids tell me, well, I like this grandma because she gets out and plays with me, but my other grandma, you know, watches us play because the other grandma doesn't have the same mobility, right? And it's like, are you a participant or are you observer? You know, for me, you know, I don't have children, so I don't have grandchildren. I do have nephews, although I'm not sure if they will ever have girlfriends, you know, they're
Awesome aunt.
yeah, I'm an awesome aunt. I'm always like, you know, what's the first thing, you know, so I'm an awesome aunt and friend. But you know, a lot of I think mine is to some degree a little bit of a cautionary tale. You know, I've said on some of these other ones, my mom had a heart attack and stroke. Now, she lived a long time before that happened, but she had a heart attack and stroke. Basically within 24 hours, went from living alone, functioning alone to a full assist. Now, you know, did she make it pretty far in her life before that happened? Yes, but I'm walking into assisted living centers where there's a woman, you know, there's a woman in there that's not that much older than I am, that her mom has brought her there because she has dementia, but her mom is still alive and her mom's caring for her. So like what I see, mine is more of a, like, I would say almost like, so is it a positive thing pulling you forward, or is it a negative thing you're trying to avoid? A lot of what's going through my head right now is midlife, 40s and 50s and, you know, early 60s is where we have kind of our we need to put the ratchet down. We need to start really thinking about taking care of ourselves with longevity in mind, because that's when a lot of these things occur that show up when we're maybe 70, 80.
Right.
So I put that through my head and I'm like, okay, it's the nursing home or assisted living subordinate plan, right? Like I'm at this moment negatively driven. You know, part of it is I want to be able to go out and go hiking and go all these places and go to Machu Picchu and actually be able to play and do that. But the other one is also to avoid what I think would be, you know, sort of crush my soul at this point, because I have to see it every day, visit my mom every day. You know, so I think it's both of those things. And I think, you know, so I think now, you know, everybody on the call can kind of think, okay, what's, you know, what is my why? So your why, because longevity hacks, right? We're going to cover some cool stuff that are like easy things that we might be able to add in, but, you know, supplements are supplemental, right?
Mhm.
If they could take the place
Yeah.
like the Jetsons and you could just take a pill and, you know, they would be replacements. We wouldn't be calling them supplements. So the reality is all the cool stuff and even the medications that have been studied that we're going to talk about tonight, you still have to do the work, right? We still have to do the lifestyle things that are the big drivers of your epigenetics that either support your genes or work away from your genes. And so those are the things that take and require work, right? And so we have to kind of go, okay, I'm going to do that.
So let's dive in to some of these hacks. You know, that's what people are here for. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I already see one in there, so we'd love to see questions and go over them. So let's talk about the basis of what we want to focus on when it comes to longevity. And I'm going to jump in on this one because I think it's really important that we love our mitochondria, that we care for them, that that we focus on them, because they are the essence of every cell, because they are what gives the cell the energy for the work that needs to be done. If our mitochondria stopped working and stopped producing ATP, we would be dead in 3 seconds, just to let you know. Okay, they are that important. And not just in giving and creating the ATP, the energy for our cells to work, for the jobs to be done, for all of the job of all the cells in our body, but they also are sensors. They also do a lot of other work for that cell. And it's really important that they are working optimally. So what are some of the things that we can do to help support our mitochondria?
Yeah. So, you know, so here's what I thought was interesting. So just to give people context, right? So longevity and aging, I'm going to give a little bit of scientific context. We have challenges in researching this in the US in particular. And it's because NIH is, well, we've got a lot going on with NIH right now, but NIH as a whole has been funded to research disease, right? Disease and disease prevention. Aging, because it is just something that happens, isn't seen as something that is a disease, so therefore doesn't really get a lot of funding. But if we look at all of the research that has legitimate funding and really good, and I would say at least emerging research that, you know, we can take, let's say, you know, unique things to help the aging process, they are all 100% driven to the mitochondria. Right? They are all mitochondrial, you know, sort of impact. And so your mitochondria are not only your power supply, but they also manufacture things. And so, you know, when we look at mitochondria, that really comes down to, are we getting the right nutrients and the right compounds into that process to help you make energy? Because basically your mitochondria can be a 1984 Yugo 4-banger engine, right? You're running, but ain't running very fast or far, right? Or you could be a high-end Lamborghini with the highest octane, you know, rocket fuel. And it comes down to the nutrients and going into the mitochondrial respiratory chain and oxygen and all those other things. And then it's also the body's ability to clean out toxins and oxidative stress, because you can't build up smog inside that powerhouse engine and not clear it out either. And so I think, you know, this is a really good kind of transition thing to look at. What really impacts your mitochondria? What genes might impact it? What nutrients might be the most powerful, mitochondrial stimulants? And then also, what are your biggest inhibitors of the mitochondria? Right? And whether it's inhibiting their ability to make energy or inhibiting the cell itself, which then therefore inhibits energy too.
Oh, absolutely. And when we're looking at genes in your DNA 360 report, so if you have your DNA 360 report, get it out, okay? Or if you already have it out, the reports that you're going to be looking at is antioxidation. So that's actually the sub-report. So it would be your anti-inflammation systems report. Okay. And there are two genes in particular that work in the mitochondria that help to remove oxidants, reactive oxygen species. These are compounds that cause mitochondrial damage and cellular damage and aging. And these two genes are SOD2, superoxide dismutase 2, and GPX. This is your glutathione peroxidase gene, and they work together, okay? Because just like how a house, okay, being a cell, all right, how we go to the grocery store, we bring in groceries, we bring in goods, consumables, okay, we bring it into the house and we use them, we eat them, and we create trash. Well, it's the same kind of thing with our cells and with the mitochondria. It's creating energy, but there is what we call metabolic waste, okay, trash, and of course oxygen creates, you know, oxidative stress, oxidative species, and problems with the cells. So we have to clear those out. Well, SOD2 and GPX and this antioxidation pathway help to do that, as well as getting into the phase 2 detoxification pathways like the glutathione conjugation pathway, which are your GST genes. So all of these work together. Remember, this is a systems biology. It's all connected. All right. So we want to make sure that they are working to the best of their ability. And if you're looking at it and you're like, oh, mine's like really slow. Okay, I've got a TT version and it's my SOD2 just is not taking care of those reactive oxygen species very well. It's not the end of the world. Yes, it may be weaker, but this is what we do is we want to do the things to help remove those oxidants. And that's why we have antioxidants, you know, things like vitamin C and E and all of these things that we get from our food, okay, that you can get from supplements. Always lean into food first. And that helps to support these pathways, helps to support the clearance, helps to support your phase 2 detoxification pathways and other things that we're going to be talking about, like sleep and exercise and all of these other wonderful aspects that help with making your genes work optimally and that work into longevity and really the health span. So
Yes.
well, I'll let you dive back in.
I agree. You know, as somebody with really crappy GPX and SOD2, you know, SOD2, I'm not great at that, you know, and even the type of exercise, when we get into the exercise, makes a difference on your ability to recover from, let's say, endurance training, right? Those things create a bunch of reactive oxygen species that you've got to be able to clean up. And when you can't, that slows the engine, right? You know, the smog builds up. So the other thing, so if we look at like the big impact for mitochondria, you know, that's where your CoQ10, your B vitamins, alpha lipoic acid, which acts both as an antioxidant and a stimulant, all the B vitamins, every single one of them play a role there too. And this is where I think the most interesting research really resides. Like, you know, this is where we look at like NAD and NAD precursors, and where they might play a role in actually stimulating mitochondrial function in a better way. You know, I'm sure probably everybody that's watching is probably like, oh yeah, I want to know, you know, does NAD work? Does NAD, you know, do the precursors work? Some of the studies, I will say some of the studies are somewhat preliminary, somewhat smaller populations, looking specifically at precursors like nicotinamide riboside or, you know, NMN. And then there's NMR also. Here's where what I thought was really fascinating. And I think this is where the challenge of the research is. A lot of your supplemental products that are out there are one or the other. Like there'll be an NMN or an NR, right?
Right.
We don't have.
And by the way, okay, so NMN is nicotinamide mononucleotide.
Yes, I should probably say.
NR is nicotinamide riboside.
Yes,
So they're a little bit different in the pathways, but
that's
they
what I was
work
just getting
toward,
to.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's basically three derivatives of NAD that are precursors that become
Yeah.
NAD. And so I think one of the challenges in the research is it depends on which precursor they're looking at, right? Because
Right.
I can tell you, like, I've taken a NR product and been like, doesn't do anything, right? No improvement,
Mhm.
right? Probably not the pathway problem I have. Many of these, we don't have commercial ways in which to like take the supplement and test.
Mhm.
So in some cases, if I'm looking at how to maybe use supplements sort of incrementally to raise mitochondrial function, products that may have, more than one NAD precursor may be better because we don't have a way to commercially distinguish which one would be best for you. One of the things that I thought was very interesting, I talked to a researcher out of China who's one of the NAD experts in the world. And we were talking about whether taking oral precursors work. And he said, yes, they do. But again, figuring out which one or which group, and he's like, all three would be better. Or whether IV raised intracellular, right? Because that's the end game. Can I get it inside the cell?
Right.
Or intramuscular raised it as well. And he surprised me, right? He surprised me because he said intramuscular. So if you went and got an NAD shot into the muscle, right, distributes over time into the bloodstream, is better at raising intracellular than a big bolus of IV. Right?
Gotcha.
I was like, okay, so, although I will say many people anecdotally say IV NAD feels great, they can really feel the difference. His thing is a lot of it is just not going to get utilized because it can't get pushed into the cell fast enough. So when you're looking at whether I'm doing NAD or something like that to raise energy, oral combinations are probably really good because the other thing is NAD gets used like that, right?
Yes.
Here in
and it decreases as you age.
Right. So it's one of the things that's gone. So I look at it, when you're looking at, so everybody here wants to probably do a longevity stack. Most of your longevity hacks are additive and continuous, right? There are some things that can come in and come out, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those things. But NAD support is best being supported on a regular basis. Right?
Yes.
Same thing with
Over
like
time.
CoQ10, alpha lipoic acid, your mitochondrial nutrients are supportive most efficiently when they're continuous.
Yeah. And to give people a little bit of a basis understanding, because I know that, we're kind of talking about, the cellular health and these words, and they're kind of like, okay, what exactly does this mean? So I want to give a little bit more of a basis on this of like NAD, and basically what we want to upregulate is NAD plus. So NAD plus you could think of like a cellular battery charger. Okay, NAD plus stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It is a coenzyme found in every cell, and it's kind of like a charging cable for your cell's batteries, the mitochondria. Okay. Without enough NAD plus, mitochondria can't efficiently turn food into energy, ATP, that being your energy. Okay. So as we age, NAD plus levels decline. Thanks, aging. Anyway, it's like having a few chargers available. So the cells, they start running on like low battery. Okay. And there's something that some of you may have heard of. I'm trying to remember his name. He's from Harvard, has done work in sirtuins, longevity.
Are you
Yeah,
two menopausal women trying to tell a story? David Sinclair. Talking about David Sinclair.
There you go, David Sinclair. Yes. Okay. He actually made sirtuins. Okay, the SIRT genes more popular. Okay, so NAD plus and sirtuins, they are connected, and I want you to realize, because sirtuins are kind of like the cell's maintenance crew. They are a family of proteins that regulate repair, metabolism, stress resilience. Okay, they need NAD plus to function. NAD plus is their fuel source. It is their food. So you can think of sirtuins as like the janitors and mechanics of your cells. They tidy up the damage, they regulate energy use, they help cells adapt under stress. So when NAD plus runs low, sirtuins can't do their job very well. And that can lead to cellular wear and tear. And so really working together when we're talking about energy production, NAD plus helps shuttle those electrons in the mitochondria, powering the ATP creation. And then the sirtuins fueled by the NAD plus, they turn on the pathways that repair DNA, that reduce inflammation, that help to optimize mitochondrial efficiency. So when NAD plus declines as we age, that sirtuin activity, that contributes to the fatigue that you're feeling, the slower repair, age-related diseases. So when you boost your NAD plus, you're helping to recharge not just your mitochondria, but the sirtuins that are helping the mitochondria. So this is really important. And I had done, listening to some medical podcasts and doing some research lately, and there were two doctors in particular that I've kind of zoned in on and looked at. And one of them was Dr. Andrew Salzman. He actually he went to Harvard. He's an alumnus of like Yale, and I think Columbia as well. Anyway, brilliant guy, been in this field for decades, has done some really groundbreaking work on NAD plus biology, PARP inhibition, clinical applications of NAD plus modulation, and really taking a look at how to fuel the body for upregulating NAD plus by doing these combinations that Dr. Betty was talking about, using NMN, using NR. And another thing that he talks about is what we call CD38. Now, CD38 is like a marker. It's an enzyme. It's key to NAD plus consuming enzyme. What it does is it actually cleaves and cuts the NAD plus, and it does play a central role in age-related decline of NAD plus. And because it affects it downstream, lowering that amount. Now, yes, it's good to have, and it has to do with being able to break down and deal with pathogens in the body, but as we age, NAD plus declines. And when we're talking about CD38, that ends up lowering those NAD plus levels even more. So some of the research that he has done is helping to lower the CD8 plus or kind of diminish its effects on breaking down and lowering our NAD plus levels. So, I mean, some really great research. Another doctor that I had looked at and done some research on was Dr. Leonard Guarente. He is a biologist at MIT, and he was one of the first to establish sirtuins, in working in conserved regulation of lifespan, looking at yeast to mammals. And he really revealed a lot of the sirtuins, particularly SIRT1, being activated during fasting, during caloric restriction, engaging that stress response pathway that coordinates gene expression, hormonal networks, the metabolism, in keeping these cells viable, in being able to get rid of these senescent cells, these old zombie cells, which is another thing that we want to jump into, talking about Senolytics. So, some of the things when we're talking about enhancing mitochondria function, looking at ways to do that and to be able to clear old mitochondria that's not working so well. We want to get rid of them, old cells that are not working so well. This is where, you know, in nutrition, having the things like Dr. Betty was talking about, things that include CoQ10, things that boost NAD+, like NMR, NMN, alpha lipoic acid, things like that. You want to avoid processed foods, excess sugar, these inflammatory seed oils. They will clog up and cause issues with the mitochondria, making it give off more inflammatory cytokines, causing more inflammation in the cell. We don't want that. For different types of lifestyle, things that I've already alluded to, intermittent fasting, movement, okay? We want to stress the body hormetically to be able to keep the mitochondria in the cells on the ready. We want our troops to be trained and ready to go. We don't want them to be lazy, all right? And also stepping into and utilizing correctly heat and cold exposures. Again, leaning into that hormetic stress to be able to strengthen the mitochondria and get rid of the old worn out ones.
Yeah. You know, when I think about it, when we're looking at, so if everybody's kind of picked up on it, the mitochondria is the center of aging, right? It's either going to promote our longevity or promote our aging process. And it comes down to cleaning out the trash, plugging in all the stuff that's needed to help boost the energy, right? And then putting stress on and off that stimulate growth or removal. Right. So if we look at, you know, Dr. Varden mentioned, you know, fasting and exercise, right? So what's very interesting is if you look at one of the biggest areas of study that showed that it slowed the path of aging, and we're talking decades back, is caloric restriction, right? Intermittent fasting and overall caloric, it's interesting, overall caloric restriction works, but then it also can make you frail because we may not have enough muscles, right? So what we're starting to see, whether we look at like Dr. Longo's work, when we look at some of the fasting studies that he has done, both in blue zones and then elsewhere, is it comes down to, you want to stimulate growth, right? So stimulate growth might be, you know, lifting weights, building muscles, because one of the things that happens when we age is mitochondrial biogenesis. So it's a fancy way of saying building more mitochondria, right? Declines as we age. And it definitely declines if we are sedentary, right? So exercise, both appropriate cardiovascular exercise and weight training and high intensity intervals and a variety of things, will increase the number of mitochondria when your cells go to replicate themselves. However, at the same time, we wouldn't keep doing that every day, all the time, no break, because you've got to break and take time off to allow clean up and repair, because if we're constantly trying to build, then we don't build really high quality. And so that's your things like autophagy, right? Cleaning up old funky parts of the cells, and mitophagy, cleaning up old funky parts of the mitochondria so your body can go back and regenerate them. Those things only happen when there's not a lot of stimulus happening, both from a food standpoint and also from an exercise standpoint. And then if we look at the drugs that work in this area, what's interesting is the biochemical mechanism that they do is some of them stimulate biogenesis and some of them stimulate autophagy or slow down mitochondrial function. So the other thing that you see hormetically, right? So stress, non-stress, recover, stress, non-stress, recover has to be kind of something that you weave in and out. So when people are looking at longevity and they're like, oh, I want to do what Brian Johnson does, you know, the guy that's going to live to 150 and he basically spends his entire day, like all he does is this, you know, stuff like this. The thing is you have to change what you're doing. It's not that I'm going to do the exact same thing every single day, because variety in stimulus, relaxation, and actually withdrawal is where the real action comes in. And I think that's the hardest part for people to get, because it's like, oh, I heard, you know, let's say, you know, an NAD plus precursor would work. I'm going to take it every single day, all the time. I'm going to do that. But it really is these other mechanisms. You know, so one of the major mechanisms that we look at across supplementation, medication, exercise, and food is the stimulation and or the suppression of mTOR. Right. So mTOR has a lot to do with how your body does muscle protein synthesis, right? Taking protein in, helping synthesize muscle. So in some cases, we want to stimulate that because we want to build muscle. But mTOR being stimulated where it's not for exercise. So one of the things that Walter Longo's research showed was an insulin-resistant, overweight person who maybe has hypertension and all these other conditions has an erroneously or excessively stimulated mTOR pathway, right? That drove insulin resistance and insulin-like growth hormone and all these other areas, even though they may not have been lifting weights. And when you do a simple stressor of intermittent fasting, especially with protein restriction, right? And everybody's going to go, but wait, I was supposed to do a lot of whole protein, right? Short term, right? Short term reduction of protein, intermittent fasting destimulates mTOR, stimulates autophagy, stimulates mitophagy, stimulates the mitochondrial biogenesis. All of a sudden, the cells start to regenerate. So the other thing that I think is really kind of hard to grasp is we have to sort of wave in and wave out lifestyle pieces and how we eat and other things to sort of optimize what we're doing. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And, talking about muscle, okay, muscle repair, you had mentioned mTOR. So mTOR, for all of you, that stands for mechanistic target of rapamycin. And this, that pathway in that word rapamycin, some of you may have heard about or have heard the latest buzz on rapamycin. Now, granted, it's not like the latest per se. Actually, Dr. Peter Attia I personally think, has really put a big spotlight on rapamycin itself. He talks extensively about it in his book Outlive. He's been talking about it on his podcast and stuff for years. I've been listening to him since, oh gosh, I think like 2016. And it's very important to understand how that works, especially with more information that has come out in the news lately. But rapamycin is a very potent inhibitor of mTOR, of that pathway. That which serves as that central regulatory node in metabolism, in growth, in that protein synthesis that Dr. Betty was talking about, in all of these things. And, so we do have to be careful about, jumping on any particular supplement when it comes to inhibiting the balance of anabolic growth promoting and catabolic, that maintenance repair aspect. When we're talking about these processes in the cells and in muscle. Zooming back out though, when we are talking about longevity hacks, muscle does matter. Muscle is really important. And there's a lot of research that has shown muscle is a longevity organ. Sarcopenia, sarcopenia meaning muscle loss, that is equivalent to higher risks of falls, fragility, metabolic issues, all of these things. And, we were talking a little bit before we started the webinar about how they have shown that grip strength has been equivalent for longevity, strength, health. But actually, Dr. Betty, this is beautiful. Please tell our audience about this person you were talking about the grip strength.
Yeah, so grip strength is used in medicine as a proxy for overall strength, right? Because we don't have a squat rack in our offices to like make a squat, right? So this person was working out with one of those grip things, like, I'm going to make sure my longevity is good. I was like, no, it's a proxy for, can you pick up something heavy and carry it for a while, right? So more so quad strength. Actually, the best measure we have of muscle and longevity is quadriceps. So your quadriceps are your muscles on the front of your thigh. And so the more we can squat or deadlift, right? Like pick up a little kid, or, you know, squat or push them overhead, the stronger we are. And so, you know, having muscle mass not only makes you less frail, but it's also the major component of glucose disposal, right? It's the largest concentration of basically mitochondria outside of the brain, right? And so, and it's also the muscle muscle is the first place to become insulin resistant, right? So when we look at insulin resistance as it sort of doubles up and starts to become pre-diabetes and diabetes, it starts in the muscle tissue, right? And in order for us to fix it, we must move the muscle tissue and make it sensitive before we can even remotely come close to reversing diabetes. And so moving and staying physically active is really important, which is a combination of weight training for muscle strength, agility and intensity to keep fast twitch muscle fibers functional so you can trip without falling and breaking something. And then it's also doing appropriate for your genetics, which we're going to talk about, the right kind of cardiovascular exercise that can help blood vessels pump and other things, because that can help mitochondrial biogenesis as well. You know, so I think we have to look at, you know, exercise as a huge component. Exercise is the only thing that we have studied in the research that is clearly shown in very large, really good case controlled trials that'll aid you in reverse, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, and a lot of it, especially for women, because when we are transitioning and going, you know, through menopause, and our hormones are all over the place and tanking, which estrogen and testosterone, these hormones help with bone strength, with muscle strength, with brain health, heart health, you name it. This is when I see, and I'm sure you do too, these postmenopausal women, osteopenia, osteoporosis. Guys, this is what we're talking about. We don't want to be fragile. We don't want to break when we fall. And so resistance training, that really needs to be focused on, because you need to have that physical stress strain of the muscle against the bone to trigger osteoblasts, you know, to trigger that bone going, oh, I need to be stronger to be able, you know, to withstand the fourth strength of this muscle being pulled, you know, for this joint. Now, it doesn't mean that okay, you haven't worked out for a while, that you go to the gym and you try to lift the heaviest thing there. Okay. It's like, what you need to do, what you need to do, just start somewhere, but work with a trainer. First of all, make sure that your form is right. You don't want to be causing injury and then being laid up and then actually going in the opposite direction. So work with someone, start low, go slow, but do it in a fashion where you are straining, you know, stressing the muscles to build stronger bones, to build stronger muscles. Okay. But work with someone who knows what they're doing so you don't hurt yourself. So there's good form, but also functional movement, flexibility, balance. I mean, that in conjunction, very important, and works very much so with the form of when you are doing resistance training, weight training, or anything like that. Because also, just in general, in the way that you walk, in the way that you move, in the way that I go to bend down to pick up my grandchild. I don't want to be stressing in such a way where I pull my back or I'm doing something like this. I mean, I've had to open back surgeries. I have injuries that, you know, I'm fine. I can do it because I've learned how to do it. I've learned to strengthen my core muscles. I've learned, you know, to lift with my legs. Okay. Not just bend over and do it, but also that range of motion is so important. You don't want to be stiff where you can hardly bend over, or, you know, you can only move from here to here instead of, you know, all the way. So it's a combination of things to do. And always keep your body moving, you know, even just walking, gardening, just walking up and down stairs, just move to allow your body also to get the lymphatics flowing and draining. Again, it's all connected. It's not just building strength in the muscles, which is really important, but it's also, you know, having the body flush the system. So,
Yeah. Yeah. You know, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about appropriate fasting and,
mhm,
you know, the difference between men and women and what might be happening if somebody's overdoing it, right? You know,
right.
if we look at the research, yes, there's some research on 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating, specifically around cognition, right? And they're looking at groups of individuals with cognitive decline. And in many cases, it is also the brain cells are no longer utilizing glucose properly, right? So the fasting
Mhm,
basically puts them in a ketogenic state, helping the body utilize ketones rather than glucose, because that's the only thing the brain can use. It's either ketones or glucose. It cannot use fat directly. And so we have good research there. However, if I'm looking at my overall longevity and my desire to put muscle mass on and keep muscle mass, in many cases, if you're fasting 16 hours every day, it is hard to get in enough protein to adequately have enough for muscle protein synthesis, because we are also not as good at that. And, you know, we're looking at data now that looks at like 2.2 grams per kilogram, which around most people, it's somewhere between 120 to about 150 grams, which is a lot, right? Which is a lot. And most of the research, if you happen to be a woman on here, shows that women don't do well on extended fasting like that, where they consistently do it all the time, right? Often it raises stress chemistry and other things. So when you look at the longevity research is really around using short periods of fasting, a couple days, you know, Walter Longo's work is really around 5 days and 7 days, and using these sort of semi-extended time periods to do a more intense fast, and then going back to feed, right? So feast to fast to feast, right? Especially if I'm trying to trigger those different things, building and then autophagy, mitophagy, and recovery, right? Because oxidative stress gets cleaned up, a bunch of things do that. So when you're looking at fasting, I would say in most cases, we don't necessarily see awesome longevity outcomes with too much extensive fasting every single day. From that standpoint, glucose control, yes, in many cases, but we may not see the other side of it. And so I think, you know, and obviously the, you know, eating for your genetic makeup, right? So for those of you that have had your DNA company test, you know, making sure that you're also being very aware. Like I've got the double whammy. I'm double mutated on AME1. I have the ApoA2. I'm double mutated on that sucker too. When I was talking about it forever ago with Kashif, I was like, yeah, I used to joke that I could eat air and that was about it. It's true. Like I can't go overboard on the carbs, and I also can't get wild on the saturated fats, right? So it's also eating for your genetics, because that's gonna, if you eat away from what your genetic makeup is, it's gonna cause more oxidative stress, more stress on the system, more inflammation. You know, I think before we go to questions and stuff too, I think we should talk a little bit about some of the medications, because I bet a lot of the people here are probably really curious about, oh, we talked about some supplements, but what about the other stuff like rapamycin, right?
please, yes.
Because that rapamycin is used predominantly, right, as a anti-rejection drug, right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So it was found on Easter Island, right, which is
Mhm.
basically, and so it's been around for a long time as an so if you got like a replacement organ, right, a donated organ, rapamycin would be used so your body doesn't attack it, right, and kill it.
Right.
But rapamycin
Yeah.
works in that same mechanism as from an mTOR standpoint. It suppresses mTOR, right, and it kind of turns down that signaling, so you don't get this inflammatory response. You go through autophagy, mitophagy, and all those other things, reduce oxidative stress. But mTOR works only if you put it in for a little while and take it out for a little while. So it's something that's rotated in and out. And it's obviously medically required, so you have to have a prescriber. And I would say a prescriber that knows how to use rapamycin.
Right.
You know, but it probably has the strongest research. And one of the more recent studies that came out had it with quercetin, and it quercetin as a nutritional product, those two together did the best outcome from longevity, looking at like in vitro studies for the cell. And I believe they also did mice, if I remember correctly. They looked at mice and in vitro.
Yeah. But I mean, the fact that it is an immunosuppressant, that right there should make you pause. Okay. This is not something that you just want to jump on and, hey, let me just keep taking this. No, I mean, short term the rapamycin or analogs to that, things that are chemically similar, they can improve immune response in, say, elderly people. Long-term inhibition, though, when you are suppressing your immune system long-term, there's going to be some side effects, and that can be problematic. And this is exactly what Dr. Murray's talking about, that if you decide to venture down that path, make sure you are working with someone who knows what they're doing and for the reason why you are looking into it. So, just
because it really
be very mindful.
So a really well put together program that would include, like, say, rotating rapamycin in, would also combine exercise and dietary intervention at the same time to sort of amplify it, right? So you wouldn't go on a massive, muscle building and take rapamycin at the same time. That's counterproductive, right? But what's interesting, so if you look at that, one of the other drugs that's been around for forever, relatively innocuous, not a huge fan of drugs, but hey, we need them from time to time, it's metformin. Right. And metformin, has relative safety, utilization, like, I don't even know how many millions of people that are on it, but it does a couple different things. So it does some inhibition of mTOR. It changes a little bit of what they call mitochondrial complex 1. So how you kind of utilize glucose at the very first step, and suppresses specifically the liver's ability to make glucose out of non-glucose materials, right? So taking protein and making it into glucose. So it suppresses a little bit of that liver function, and therefore reduces a thing called AMPK, right? So all of that slows cellular function slightly. But all of that leads to the same thing: autophagy, mitophagy, reduced oxidative stress, immune stimulation. There's one study that sort of started this whole longevity pathway sort of question, right? Does it really help or not? And the study sort of alluded to that. And there's a bigger study now called PEMF that is actually examining this very, very clearly. It hasn't completely, I don't think it's published yet completely, but it may have value there where it can be used. And I would bet, really honestly, what we might see, I think the TAME study needs to be done to really say, is it truly a longevity drug or not? But I think it's going to be very much like rapamycin, that in a metabolically sound individual, it's something that's used for a period of time and taken out and used for a period of time. Now, obviously, if somebody's diabetic and it's been prescribed for those reasons, that's different. But because you wouldn't want to necessarily suppress mitochondrial complex 1, like, let's say, in an endurance athlete. Right? You don't want to shut down part of the ability for the cell to take glucose into the cell and get it to the powerhouse in somebody who might be highly athletic. So I think, again, this is something that if you're looking at working with somebody who does longevity, you need to be really, really detailed about how you work out, what do you do, and other things, because you could cause low blood sugar and other things in somebody who might be overly training if you're giving metformin all the time.
I also wanted to throw in there a gene that we look at that you'll find in your longevity report, FOXO3, FOXO3. And rapamycin, metformin, they affect this gene. So, okay, why is this gene so important? Well, first of all, it is a highly researched gene when it comes to longevity. It actually encodes a transcription factor that's really important for regulating cellular stress, resistance, metabolism, cell cycle control, apoptosis, which is the the cells like killing itself because it's not working very well. It works in DNA repair, inflammation, all of these things, which obviously are very important for mitochondrial cellular health. It helps regulate the antioxidant genes that I talked about earlier, SOD2, GPX, as well as catalase. And so when we're talking about FOXO3, which, by the way, if you have a G allele, that's a good thing. That actually bumps you up to having advanced longevity, or if you have a GG, that's like superhuman longevity for that particular gene. It is not the only gene, though. It's just one that has been very highly studied and focused on, and is strongly associated with exceptional human longevity across global populations, making it one of the most consistently replicated longevity genes in humans. So here, when we're talking about like rapamycin, FOXO3 variants are associated, like I said, with human longevity, and rapamycin indirectly supports FOXO3 activity. And how it does that is it helps to enhance autophagy and stress resilience. When we're talking about we had mentioned Senolytics earlier. Okay. Remember, the removal of those zombie cells. Well, FOXO3 helps to enhance resistance to cellular stress, influences those senescent pathways to help get rid of those old zombie cells. And, so that pathway is enhanced through Senolytics. For metformin, so metformin actually activates what we call the AMPK pathway. It enhances FOXO3's. Really, it works in the nuclear translocation, where it travels into the nucleus, and that again helps to support stress resistance, antioxidation, gene activation, autophagy. All of these things. So they are accessing and influencing FOXO3 and that longevity pathway. So yeah, there's some really good things, but again, it's not something that you just go, oh great, I'm just going to go out and get a prescription and take all these. You need to go in knowing, okay, there's pros and cons here. Pulsing and being on a specific regimen with someone who knows what they're doing, like Dr. Betty was talking about.
Yeah. And I think, even we have to speak a little bit to like stem cell and some of the regenerative, stem cell, and then exosomes, which are basically the growth factors produced by stem cells. We have a lot of research still going on. There's a lot of places outside of the United States that do a lot more extensive treatment, but stimulating our own stem cells, utilizing stem cell therapy, and exosomes, which are the growth factors that really are massively anti-inflammatory. All are part of those. And I think we're going to start to see that really open up in the next couple of years. And again, like you can go outside of the United States and get quite a bit of those things, but even just stem cell therapy and exosome therapy for joint, which is where most of our United States sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Allowed services sort of play into. I don't know if anybody read this, but menstrual blood has the highest count of stem cells, which makes sense, right? Because it's the uterine lining preparing for potential implantation, right? And so we have different parts of the body, the bone marrow, the body fat, the menstrual blood, that produce stem cells constantly, umbilical cord, right? So there's lots of opportunity. Those things, we'll see that kind of coming into fruition. But I think the big thing is like what we're really talking about is massive changes in, using diet, lifestyle, exercise, supplementation, appropriately, and then also medications when appropriate to reduce inflammation and slip back and forth between building and repairing. Building, repairing. And repairing is also making sure you got a massive overhaul and you're taking a bunch of trash out. Right. It's not taking out the trash every week. It is clean out the closets and everywhere else. And that's where those other techniques come in.
Yeah. And, I'll tell you, sleep is a major aspect of a time period when that repair happens, which unfortunately we don't have a lot of time to get into right now because we've got questions to answer. And I would highly recommend going back and listening to the webinars we have done specifically on sleep, because we do a bit of a deep dive into why, how, what's going on, and how does that repair happen. Also working into hormone regulation. That is actually when testosterone is made. So, all right, let's get into questions.
Yeah, I just got to say something about sleep. We spend a third of our time.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't just sleep when you're dead, right? We are designed to sleep. We are designed to sleep because that's a massive over on the body. We can't overlook that. And you could be doing all these other things, and if you're not sleeping and getting adequate sleep, it's going to set you back, right?
Right. All right, so let's hop over to our question and answer box. And our first question is from Sue, and she asks, does a PEMF mat help with aging? Is it helpful for neuropathy?
Yeah.
So you want to
I'll take
jump in? Sure.
Yeah. This is like Lotto. Give me, what is it, the Hollywood Squares or whatever. Okay, so for anybody that doesn't know what PEMF stands for, it's pulsed electromagnetic field, right? And there's actually quite a bit of research here just in general. So it's applied to the body. Often it's a mat, it might be a small dot to use on different things. Current studies, primarily when we're looking at the cellular level, indicate that it can help with a lot of these cellular functions that we've been talking about, like reducing inflammation, stimulating the body's cells to get rid of trash, to stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis and revitalizing cell function. And there is some studies showing that it also increases mesenchymal stem cells. So that can influence the regenerative process of these mesenchymal cells. So if, let's say, you were getting some sort of stem cell therapy using PEMF with it, so essentially it's going to help metabolic reprogram by improving like cellular function at the mitochondria, and then improving mitochondrial function. And I did find one study, I was looking while I saw it pop up. It's a 2024 study on endothelial cells. So those are the interior cells on the inside of your arteries, showing that PEMF exposure promoted a shift in energy metabolism to aerobic glycolysis. So improving cellular energy production, right? So that's huge. And it also reduced reactive oxygen species. So it kind of reduced that, where we genetically may not be that great. So if you're using PEMF, definitely helpful. Yeah, definitely helpful. Now, is it enough by itself? Maybe not, but it can definitely be part of the arsenal. It does have definite indication for like neuropathy, blood flow. It helps stimulate blood flow, and also genesis of new arteries and blood vessels. So.
All right. Well, thank you. So our next question is from Anne, and she's asking, is creatine supplementation recommended for muscle and brain health? And that is a great question. And yes, 2 thumbs up. When we're talking about in the muscle health, creatine helps regenerate ATP, that cellular energy, during short, high intense activity. It does increase strength, power output, muscle growth, helps preserve lean muscle mass, may support bone health indirectly by improving that muscle strength. There are meta-analyses that consistently show improved performance and muscle mass across age groups, from athletes to elderly patients. So talking about creatine and brain health. Now, when we're thinking about neuroenergetics, okay, so the brain uses creatine to maintain ATP levels, especially under times of stress, sleep deprivation, intense cognitive demand, things like that. Now, granted, there's not a lot of research, not like there is, with muscle, but some studies do show improvement in memory, reasoning, mental fatigue resistance, particularly in older adults, in vegetarians,
Yeah.
so because they generally do not get enough protein. As far as like neuroprotection, there is some early evidence that suggests creatine may support, brain resilience in neurodegenerative diseases, though, large trials are mixed. So again, the robustness in studies is not quite there yet. But honestly, it can do a body good, working the muscles. And then if you get some brain health on top of it, woohoo.
Yeah, definitely improves it. I would say probably the strongest research is improving working memory, processing speed, and also recovery from like poor sleep. So like if you are sleep deprived, creatine in the morning can help. It's definitely part of my arsenal. I'm just going to be honest, every day.
Oh yeah, me too. All right. So Susan's got a couple questions here. So her first one, she asked, could you please explain phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification? So just a quick and dirty, phase 1 generally deals with the CYP genes. These are your cytochrome P450 genes. This is what starts breaking down these toxins or metabolites into a more water-soluble form. Okay, it's that first step. And this is where like antioxidation comes in, that actually straddles the phase 1 to phase 2 detoxification. Some compounds that you will find that you get from food that are part of this is like your vitamin C, A, E, NAC, things like this that help with that transition as antioxidants. Now, phase 2, these are what we call your conjugated pathways. This is where a molecule, whether it's a glutathione, whether it's a methyl group, whether it's an amino acid, gets conjugated or connected to the substrate, whether that is a neurotransmitter, that's being broken down, processed, whether it's a hormone metabolite that again is continuing to be, broken down and processed out of the system. Because what's happening is we are making more of a fat soluble toxin or substrate water soluble to be excreted out of the body, because we can't excrete out the fat soluble. We have to make it water soluble. So that's that next phase that happens to make it even more water soluble. So then it can goes to phase 3 to actually then mix with urine, bile, and to get pooped out, peed out, sweat out, and all that other stuff. Okay. So I hope that that briefly explained it. So her second question, what are our thoughts on timeline as a mitochondrial support, urolithin A?
Yeah.
I will be honest, I take it. What
you?
about you? What do you think?
It's actually, so it's a compound made by gut bacteria, right?
Mhm.
And so what it was found was that it helps your body particularly make muscle tissue, right? So they found that it decreased inflammation and increased muscle strength, right, in sedentary older individuals. And so in multiple studies and looking at like health span. So urolithin A absolutely can be advantageous, and it might be something you put in the variety of stacks, right? What's interesting is the question is, do you know if you need it, right? Because if you already have bacteria producing urolithin A, that may not be something that you need for a stack, right? Because you've already got a fair amount being produced, because we don't know if more is better, right? That's the other thing. Supplements aren't like more is always better. There are a couple there, like I know Tiny Health, which is a stool testing company, has added urolithin A to their battery of tests in the microbiome. So it might help you figure out whether you really need it or not. But I've taken it off and on. I'm not taking it right now, but I have taken it off and on. It's been part of my stack off and on.
Yeah. And it stimulates mitophagy.
Yep.
We want to get rid of those, old worn out cells. So, or the old worn out mitochondria.
Yeah.
And that's, one of the main things that it does focus on. So
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few, that stimulates it. There's a few Senolytics products out there that are really well put together that do a good job. So
oh, I'm gonna give this to you. So I probably am gonna absolutely butcher the name. I'm so sorry. Kishori. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Anyway, so they're asking, how does a consumer of supplements learn about the nuances of supplements? Clinics specializing in aging are few in number.
true. It's 100% true. As somebody who has a clinic for the last 20 years, it's we have people that like fly in. It's rough, but so some of it is, you can definitely use some of the research. So you can search by, and even Google now has kind of an AI driven research module that will actually point you to research. There are some credible databases. There is one called examine.com that actually does legitimate research. It's independent researchers. So if you have questions about supplements and what are they indicated, where have studies been done, what indication has strong evidence, so evidence, no evidence whatsoever, and also what doses have been done. That is probably one of the best websites to get information on, because they are completely unbiased, right? The challenges in the nutritional supplement world is there's not a lot of money here to study this stuff, because, unlike pharmaceuticals, where the pharmaceutical company can bring out a drug and make it synthetic and patent it so nobody can make it, I could create a supplement today, go study it in humans, produce it, and by tomorrow my competitor can make it. And so most of the studies almost always are going to be smaller populations. They might be rats. So that Examine helps you go through this data. So examine.com, there's a small charge for it. But what it does help you do is understand what has probably some of the best research. And then what's the legitimate dose? So I'm going to nail a supplement company here because they make me crazy just because I can. Right. So there's a lot of subterfuge out there in marketing online, right? And especially if you look on social media. Right. And there's one, I'm going to go ahead and say it, AG1. AG1 has a massive market share, and they constantly are promoting, oh, we have all of these nutrients, right? All of these nutrients, most of which are not at therapeutic doses, right? And they're saying, oh, it's synergistic. And I'm like, how do you know it's synergistic? Has anybody studied that exact product in large populations for all of these claims? Not necessarily. So I think it's, kind of buyer beware, be attentive to what's being marketed, because, lots of things can be said. And I use that site. There's a couple other ones that we look for, like drug interactions and things like that professionally, but Examine's available to anybody.
Yeah, I love Examine. I actually use them. There's an app that I became aware of called Suppco, SUPPCO, short for Supplement Collective. It's like a health tech app designed to make sense of, confusing supplement world. And, it helps to manage stacks. You can put in your supplements, it tracks it, it lets you scan or even manually log in your supplements. It can look at, which ones should be taken at the same time. I haven't used it enough to try to poke holes in it. But maybe for the initial person, that can, look good if you are, just trying things out. So, that's something else. I mean, we have no affiliation or anything, but it was something I became aware of, and I found, rather interesting. So, all righty. Okay, so let's get, because we've got a few more questions here. Yvonne is asking, how does one boost your NAD plus? So we did talk a little bit about this, but I'll just briefly go through some lifestyle strategies and supplements and things like that. So exercise. Okay, especially high intensity interval training, resistance training helps to increase that NAD plus turnover, stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis that Dr. Murray talked about earlier. Fasting, caloric restriction, that intermittent fasting, that definitely helps to upregulate enzymes that recycle NAD plus. Sleep. Okay. NAD plus works on a daily clock. So poor sleep disrupts the cycle. Morning sunlight helps to reset the rhythm. So, making sure that you're working off of your circadian rhythm and getting good sleep. I had mentioned heat, hot and cold stress. Okay. Sauna, cold exposure. Again, being careful. Don't go to extremes here. Do what your cardiovascular profile can handle, what your current health, works. So, work with someone on the best way to do this, but that, may stimulate NAD production and NAD plus related pathways. But also getting into precursors like we talked about, NR, NMN. These are very well studied to help increase NAD plus in humans. Also niacin, B3. It's inexpensive, but just be careful because higher doses can cause flushing. Other things that we've talked about, like quercetin, pterostilbene, anything with like methyl donors, trimethylglycine, folate, B12, they do help to support NAD plus recycling, although be mindful about the form that you should take based on your genetics. So this would be in your methylation pathway. So take a look. And creatine, creatine conserves that cellular ATP, which reduces the NAD plus drain. So you want to also make sure that you are not doing things that will drain NAD plus, like alcohol, like
please throw in alcohol.
Anything that would cause chronic inflammation. So those things you want to stay away from.
Yeah, because alcohol directly depletes it. Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Next question. Robin is asking, or first states, I have become more sedentary because I've been watching health webinars because I'm so interested in health. Ironic. That's funny. Not sure how to schedule better balance. The webinar Zoom addiction.
Yeah. Well, it's, go ahead.
I listen while walking. I will actually just
take it with you
and just take it with me.
Yeah, I started listening to, instead of listening to music while I worked out, I was multitasking. So I'm whether I'm listening to a science podcast or somebody else's presentation, I tend to do it then just because I'm like, I can't do both because I don't have that much time on my schedule.
Right.
Walking desk, like getting a walking pad, that it's not massive exercise, but it is movement. So I totally get it, Robin.
Yeah. Or, like I will do, because I have a certain workout regimen, I'll put my iPad up, I'll, put a particular webinar or something on, and I'll be doing my crunches. I'll be doing my, Russian twists and other exercises that my daughter puts together for me and is trying to kill me. Anyway, yeah, she's a personal trainer. So I'll do those things while I'm watching. So you can actually marry the two instead of being sedentary. Start being creative in the way that you can do both.
Yeah.
All right. So let's
I can handle this one, Christine.
Please do.
Yeah. What is a good plan for fasting if I have osteopenia? What should it look like and how often should I do it? So if I was implementing, and some of it, so I'm going to sort of back up. My team and I have a specialty in osteopenia because we do women's health, osteopenia, osteoporosis. So the biggest goal is to make sure that it doesn't progress, right? So obviously resistance training, eating enough, getting enough calories, in particular protein, and all of the right nutrients. Those are the primary focus. If I were to integrate some fasting, the fasting I prefer for women, and this would be true even for a woman who might be using it to get some of these autophagy benefits, is what's called 5-2 fasting. We have good research on it. It's been researched. And what that basically boils down to is 2 days out of the week, you skip a meal. Like most people go, okay, I'm not going to do breakfast. You have therefore a shortened eating window, and there's a little bit of caloric deficit on that day. It's still long enough to often create a little bit of autophagy, right? A little bit of mitochondrial function without causing an overall caloric deficit for the week that may be too extensive that could lead to muscle mass loss and therefore bone loss. You could also potentially do, once a quarter, just a little short, fasting stint of 3 to 5 days. Even the L Nutra Prolon 5-day fasting mimicking diet is great, because that is actually a way to eat and still stimulate the exact same mitochondrial function and bodily function as fasting with no food, but holding on to muscle mass too. Because you want to marry those two things together. You don't want to make sure that you're not overdoing it, which is why you asked. Yeah. Dr. Varden, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you've covered that very well. And I know that we've only got like a minute left, and I'm going to address Robin's questions, because there was 2 of them here, and it was more or less a comment saying that metformin depletes B12, they hear, and can contribute to Alzheimer's. Now, and this is an excellent and very relevant question, especially since metformin is one of the most widely used medications for type 2 diabetes and is now being studied as a potential longevity drug. And as far as it depleting B12 levels, I mean, there are multiple studies and meta-analyses that do confirm that long-term metformin use reduces B12 levels because the mechanism, it interferes with B12 absorption in the small intestines. And by what it does is it affects the calcium dependent membrane action. So yeah, especially higher doses, long-term use, there's going to be issues, even, working into neuropathy from B12 deficiency, which can be mistaken as diabetic neuropathy. So yeah, this is definitely something to be aware of. And for the fact of, when you are looking in your genetics in your FUT2 gene, if you are a non-secretor having an A allele in there, you're already having issues with B12 absorption. So making sure, if you are on this for whatever reason, that you are checking your B12 levels and that you are doing some sort of sublingual B12 supplementation, again, based on your genetics, looking at your mTOR gene to see which form of B12 you should be taking. And, as far as Alzheimer's,
I mean, B12, if it's low, can contribute to permanent dementia. Like if you have reduced B12 for long periods of time, you can induce dementia that is not recoverable.
Yeah. And I mean, and the real dichotomy of this is that metformin has been shown to have neuroprotective properties because of the improvement in insulin sensitivity in the brain, reducing oxidative stress and inflammation, enhancing the AMPK activation. So it's like, but then you've got the B12. So again, you've got this push-pull, these pro cons that you really need to take into account, that if you don't need it for, diabetes, or that they're, depending on what it's for, know what it does, know why you're taking it, and any long-term effects or impacts that you are disrupting another pathway somewhere down the line.
And at least support it, right? Because if you take B12 sublingually or intramuscular or whatever, you bypass that concern, but you just want to keep doing it.
Right.
I can give a couple favorite books,
Oh, yeah. So this last question, are there any introductory texts on aging and how to hack it?
I mean, I am a huge fan of David Sinclair's Lifespan longevity book. I do like Outlive by Peter Attia. That's a bit of a tome. What I would do is listen to it. Do an audible.
Yeah.
I think those are both good. They're gonna kind of wrap around what we just talked about. Yeah.
So I mean, there are a lot of great information when you start looking at the names, the researchers. Get a researcher who is from a university, who's actually done the work, who is published, and look at the books that they have written, because there's real research behind it, not just some person out there, some media person guru, and follow the research in that, and take a look and look at different authors. So Find what strikes you. So everyone, wow, thank you so much. That went by very quickly. Dr. Betty, you are just awesome. I love you
You are
so
too,
much. I
Dr.
love
Arden.
working with you.
And I didn't get colorful. We're all good.
Yes.
I didn't
And
get
there's
super
still-
spicy today. Sometimes I do.
Yeah, and there's still so much more we could have dove into. I mean, this is a big subject. This is a big area, and there's so
Well,
many aspects.
yeah, and I think when we really get down to it, we've only scratched the surface because again, we aren't getting funding to figure out how to slow the active aging because it's
Right.
not seen as a disease. I would argue the same as David Sinclair. We should look at it because it is the largest contributor to all forms of dying.
Mm-hmm.
It is
And
it is part of the process.
and you know what? I am going to bring up this last point that the longest running study, it is in its 80th year, like decade of research. It's a Harvard study on longevity, and they found that the number one thing for longevity wasn't a drug, wasn't, the exercise. You know what it was? Relationships. It was having strong relationships. I mean, it's amazing. So, making sure that you have good quality relationships, you know, along with all of these other things.
Mhm.
We are not an island. We are all connected. And, being able to lean on one another and to be accountable for one another and to have that love and to share that, that's really important. Make sure you've got someone you can call at 2 o'clock in the morning when you need them.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We love having you here. We love to talk about these things, and we hope you have learned something that you can, take away some pearls that we've been tossing out. So enjoy. We look forward to seeing you at the next one tomorrow. I'll be back. So until then, have a great night. Get some good sleep. All right, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.